start the conversation off, I'm very pleased to say, Caroline Slocock, former private secretary to Margaret Thatcher and director of the Civil Exchange think tank, joins me now. Hello, Caroline. Thank you for joining me this afternoon.
Hello.
What is your assessment of that one particular sentence, first of all, in Sir Keir's opinion piece today? Margaret Thatcher sought to drag Britain out of its stupor by setting loose our natural entrepreneurialism. Do you think that that's an accurate summation of her time?
Well, I think it's certainly true that she was trying to make a kind of sea change, a real change in the path of Britain, and succeeded. And, the way she saw it, I think, was that Britain was being set on a path of natural decline. In fact, when I first joined the civil service, I remember being taught at the Civil Service College about how Britain was inevitably going to become the sort of new Portugal. So, yes, I think she certainly tried to unleash our natural entrepreneurialism. I think the reality is that in some ways she created a service economy, a massive service economy, largely London-based, which wasn't really the sort of, the kind of entrepreneurialism that she talked about, which, she was the daughter of a shopkeeper. She sort of wanted, to sort of set new sort of self-employment, new entrepreneurialism. But yeah, I think, it was certainly her vision. And it is certainly true that she did change Britain. And in fact, I think her legacy is actually lasting. I think lasted too long, in my view. Her vision of a sort of efficient state, a much smaller state, where you kind of cut back on the state in order to unlock that entrepreneurialism. I think that's very much the vision of the modern Conservative Party. Low tax, low, small state. And, it's time actually for a change. So I would agree that she did change things. And I would agree that it is time for a change, which I think were the two fundamental aspects of his argument.
It's an interesting person for him to align himself with, even if it is just in one sentence, given the fact that she is a very divisive character, especially amongst Labour voters. What are your reflections on that?
Absolutely. I mean, I've written a book about Margaret Thatcher, about the last 18 months where I worked for her, and I've always gone to great lengths to demonstrate that I wasn't a political supporter. I was a civil servant, because she's such an enormously divisive figure, especially in the north of England, and in Scotland and in Wales, where she destroyed whole communities and didn't really put anything else in its place. But, I have to say, having seen her close to and seen the changes that she did make, even though I didn't agree with all of them, I do think that she actually demonstrated that one person can make a massive change in our politics. And I think that was certainly true of Clement Attlee, who was also mentioned. It is a very divisive thing to do. I'm not so surprised because, I couldn't help but notice that Rachel Reeves in her conference speech was sort of talking about ironclad discipline, being quite Thatcherist, Thatcherite really, in her tone. And I think that, I can see why he's doing it, but I'd like to see him portraying himself as somebody with a new vision and the real determination to make that new vision stick.
You worked with Margaret Thatcher very closely, as you say. If you were going to advise Sir Keir Starmer, which aspects of her leadership would you recommend he replicates and which bits would you set aside?
Well, I mean, she was certainly flawed in a number of ways, but actually her strengths turned out to be her weaknesses towards the end of her time. Her resoluteness, her inability to listen to other people, but her belief in herself became sort of major problems and led to her being defenestrated. But I would say that having vision and having drive and having application, real determination. These are qualities that you do have to have as a leader. You can't be like Boris Johnson, waking up every morning and looking at the headlines from the Daily Telegraph and the Daily Mail, which apparently is what he did, and just sort of swaying to kind of the forces that change from day to day. You have to understand what you really want to do, and then you have to really work to do it. It's very difficult in government to make change happen There are enormous forces, inertia really, against you. And you can only do it with the kind of personal qualities that Margaret Thatcher had. Much as they irritated people, it allowed her to make change happen. But you have to combine that with a really, fresh vision, which, I've yet to see, hope to see coming forward, because I think we do need a change.
Caroline Slocock, former private secretary to Margaret Thatcher and director of the Civil Exchange think tank. Thank you very much indeed. Andrew Fisher is former director of policy for the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn and columnist for the I paper. So, Andrew, you've just heard there a description of Margaret Thatcher's better traits: vision, hard work, and an ability to push through inertia. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, I think she probably did work hard. I think she definitely had a vision for Britain, and she did push through massive changes. I'd say that most of them are negative, and we're living with the consequences of them today. She created a huge amount of boom and bust through the deregulation of the finance sector, which ultimately led to the big banking crash in 2008, which hit Britain harder than most other places. We still haven't recovered from that. Growth since then, since that Thatcherite model effectively fell apart in 2008, growth in this country has averaged 1% a year, which is pretty appalling.